Hello, everyone. I'm Ries Trump, Associate Director of Coalition Relations at the Heritage Foundation. I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar today on immigration and border security. Where are we now and what's next? Welcome to those joining us from our Resource Bank network, our closest friends and allies and conservative leaders. Welcome also to the members of the public. Our public programs team has a full suite of robust programming, which you can always find at theheritage.org/events website. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. This session is being recorded and will be posted on resourcebank.org within the next 48 hours. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We encourage you to submit your questions. You can do this by using the gray questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. When doing so, please identify yourself and your organization. And finally, please complete the brief survey that will appear on your screen at the conclusion of our program. We value your feedback. I'm pleased to have with us today for today's discussion the Honorable Ken Cuccinelli, Lora Ries, Hans von Spakovsky, and our moderator, Dr. Jim Carafano. A few words about each of the speakers. Ken Cuccinelli is currently the Acting Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. He has served as the Acting Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, where he advanced many of the Trump administration's critical priorities to secure the southern border and identify areas that strengthen the country's legal immigration system. Mr. Cuccinelli serves as a leading spokesman for the department and advocates for the policies that the Trump administration has implemented in the public arena, as well as on Capitol Hill. Lora Ries is a senior research fellow for Homeland Security in the Center for Technology Policy here at Heritage. She has over 23 years of experience in the immigration and Homeland Security arena. She twice worked at the Department of Homeland Security on immigration policy and operations issues, and most recently as the Acting Deputy Chief of Staff. She also worked in the private sector as a Homeland Security and industry strategist and in government relations. Hans von Spakovsky is both a manager of Heritage's Election Law Reform Initiative and a senior legal fellow in the Mies Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at Heritage. He is an authority on a wide range of issues, including civil rights, civil justice, the First Amendment, immigration, the rule of law, and government reform. In addition to the work he has done on election integrity, Hans has published many articles and reports regarding the legal and judicial issues surrounding immigration reform and is one of the leading voices on the issue. Our moderator is Dr. James Carafano, who is the Vice President of the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy here at Heritage. He directs Heritage's team of foreign and defense policy experts in 6 centers on the front lines of international affairs and immigration policy. His recent research has focused on developing the national security required to secure the long-term interests of the United States, protecting the public, providing for economic growth, and preserving civil liberties. We are pleased to have you all here today. I will now turn the conversation over to Jim Carafano.
Thanks, Ries. Thanks everybody for joining us. It's such an impressive turnout. We're so excited to have you. Thanks for the questions. We're already starting to get questions and we hope people will ask lots of questions. I just wanted to say, regardless of all the issues going on in America today, immigration and border security remains one of our premier public policy issues. We look at these kind of events that we do at Resource Bank completely differently than almost every other program that we do. These are really about finding solutions and building dialogue. The last Resource Bank we had a tremendous event on immigration and border security, actually gave birth to a really important project that Hans worked on. I hope we can share the link on that research. It was based on the discussion, people wanted to know what can state and local groups do to support good public policy on immigration and border security. We produced some great research that came out of that seminar. That's the spirit that we have here today. And so we have a tremendous team of experts. We'll get right to them. Where are we on immigration and border security? Where are we going? What can we achieve? And to begin with, I'd like to invite the Honorable Ken Cuccinelli to provide some introductory remarks on where the administration stands and where it's going forward. And then we'll go to our experts and then we'll bring everyone else in.
I appreciate that introduction. It's good to be with you all at the Heritage Foundation again, as so often is the case. A lot has changed in the last year in the immigration space, thanks to President Trump's leadership. We've gotten an awful lot done. If you think back to May of last year, you remember we were at the height of the southern border crisis with 144,000 apprehended illegal crossings. just the ones we caught. Well, last month, April, operating under Title 42 authority, and not to get too legally geeky on you, that is a public health authority based on the CDC's order to avoid the introduction of people who could add to the COVID-19 problem through our southern border, really through both our borders. And so we have much faster opportunities to repatriate people coming across the Mexican border. To give you an idea, 80% southern border who we apprehend now are returned to Mexico. Border Patrol and of OFO within the Customs Border Protection, led by Commissioner Mark Morgan. They've been doing a spectacular job with a lot of support across the Department of Homeland Security. So that's a major change. Now, we are worried about COVID-19 south of the border, all the way to South America. We're worried about what it's doing to their economies, just like we worry about what it's doing to ours. The difference being when their economies have struggles, their migration, illegal migration to our country expands. So we're watching that very closely and tracking the intelligence in that area as well. Of course, a feature of the president's efforts has been building a beautiful brand new wall, and we're closing in on the 200-mile mark. You'll recall we passed the 100-mile mark in January, so the rate of building has accelerated very dramatically as we've gotten farther into the Trump administration. Working with the Army Corps of Engineers, we have covered a lot of ground, literally. And I'll tell you what, Border love the new wall. They love it. It makes them safer. It makes it easier for them to accomplish their mission. And it genuinely blocks illegal traffic, whether so it's very well received by the men for the rest of this year, thanks to the president's leadership in that area. We, as part of our response to the crisis last year, we have worked our way, even before COVID-19 and the health order on the border, to end what's called catch and release. We were holding the people we were apprehending by the end of the fiscal year 19 and into this year, where that was not happening last year. With 144,000 coming across last May, half of them, even more than CBP custody. That was a genuine, uncontrolled invasion. Now, we still have lockdowns every day still, but now they're overwhelmingly adult male Mexican citizens. We probably have 200 to 300 that get away every day. Those numbers add up, as you might imagine. But on the regulatory front, one of the things that I hope we're going to see is putting in place firmer bars to the ability of people who cross illegally to work in this country. We treat people who come in illegally as the same as everybody else, and they're not. And we've been working to change that in the Trump administration. One of the ways we've ended catch and release is through partnership, really, with Mexico for the MPP program, the Migrant Protection Protocols program. What this does is, again, aside from the public health order that we're enforcing right now, but before that, this is how we got rid of catch and release. You'll remember last spring, not 2 months ago, but a year and 2 months ago, when the president was being very tough with Mexico, talking about tariffs and shutting down the border, as well as the northern. And a lot of people on both sides of the aisle were criticizing the president for being so tough. But the fruit of that discussion was that Mexico became the illegal immigration that they've ever been. And the MPP program will be detained in the United States, or worse, what was happening last year, be released into the United States with the hopes that they would show up for their hearings. Needless to say, many of them don't. And the MPP program has been a wild success with about 60,000 people waiting in MPP. And these are overwhelmingly from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. And Mexico's been a great partner in this, even while they've been bolstering their own southern border defenses against illegal immigration. One of the things you haven't seen funny is caravans. Again, part of this is because of COVID, but earlier than that, they were breaking up because Mexico, the United States, and the Northern Triangle countries had begun putting tools in place to impede those caravans, organized illegal invasions. And we have put largely a stop to them. Under COVID-19, we have mutually agreed travel restrictions with Mexico and Canada. They limit travel to only essential economic travel. So we keep the trade flowing with our two largest trading partners, but we reduce all of the other traffic dramatically by 2/3 or more. And that has really helped us keep control of the border. On the line to interdict illegal crossers and returning people in about 2 hours. And with no vaccine in sight for a while, it seems like this is going to be the order of the day for a while. So it's going to be very important to make sure that we have the resources we need in CBP and in ICE to continue this process, but also the legal authority that we need under Title 42 to continue this process. We have all the usual judicial challenges. You see judges try to get in the way of what we're doing all the time. But when these cases get fought out, the Trump administration wins because heritage. Any day now, we are prepared to implement that. We are fully expect to win that case, which will mean that the president's wind down of DACA can take place. The other thing is you've heard about green light laws and sanctuary cities. We have already taken some actions with New York State that has gone farther than anyone else to block our immigration law enforcement in that state. And we are looking at all sorts of other alternatives we can do there. Stay tuned. Until they reopen the information flow, things like plates, those sorts of things, very Pennsylvania, plane through down, get taken down by some heroes, and then 9/11, the Twin Towers were hit. And one of the things we learned, sort of looking back after the fact, was that government wasn't sharing law enforcement information readily enough. And here we have the state of New York intentionally cutting off exactly that information. The irony is incredible, and we're doing everything we can at the Department of Homeland Security to overcome it. So that's where things stand now. It's some of our current battles with New York and some other states that are trying to bar us from information so we can't do our job. But Jim, I'm going to hand it on back to you, and thank you all for having me with you.
Well, thanks. That was a really impressive update. Let me ask Lora and Hans to join us. And if Lora can maybe give a short update and assessment of where we are on border security and maybe some of the things that Heritage is working on that area. And then Hans, if you want to join us, and if maybe you could talk about immigration policies, what our ongoing research and priorities are, and what are the issues that we're looking at. So Lora and then Hans, and then we'll bring the secretary back in, and we'll go right to questions. And thank you. We've got lots of questions. Can never have enough of them, so please keep asking them. Go ahead, Lora.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli. So a couple issues that I'll be speaking on have to do with the COVID-19 from the economic recovery aspect, and then 1 point on DACA. So with respect to economic recovery, given the sudden and the drastic downturn that we've experienced, it's a priority to get Americans back to work. But we need to carefully consider immigration policies to make sure we're not overly restricting our recovery, and it's a difficult balance. So one step the administration has taken is worth following and watching, and that is to combat Chinese tactics for stealing research and intellectual property from the US via our universities or high-tech jobs. So the president had issued a proclamation restricting student visas or exchange program visas for grad students doing research. But the language says if the research supports China's military civil fusion strategy, and that's pretty broad. I would think it may be kind of operationally challenging for the State Department and DHS to implement that and to detect that sort of theft or tech transfer. So it'll be interesting to see how the two departments carry this out going forward. And so the student visas are actually just the beginning of a life cycle that goes from foreign students to research work to high-tech work. And despite the work restrictions that those student visa categories have, the past administration has created what's called an optional practical training, or OPT, and then that's since been expanded also under the Obama administration. And it allows foreign students to do work related to their degree. The universities and colleges are running this OPT program, and we know that universities and colleges have an interest in having international students because they pay full freight, they pay full cost, tuition and the like to go to school there. And the schools have an administrative role to implement the visa program and their participation there. Those administrators aren't in a position to, say, fight fraud or to detect tech transfers or information going back to China. So OPT has several issues with it. The program needs reform, including tax and welfare exemptions. So the question is, will the administration be making changes to the OPT program going forward? And given the spotlight that COVID and Chinese tactics, those have put the spotlight on this program. And so the administration has indicated wanted to do changes to the program in the past. So now would be the time to get those changes over the goal line. The next step in this life cycle then is the H-1B program, or a high-tech visa. And this is another program that needs reform. It has fraud, it needs some American worker protections, it needs to prevent intellectual property theft. So like OPT, the administration has also indicated it would like to make some changes to this program. So the question is, will the administration be completing those changes now, given its efforts to pursue economic recovery and to keep China more honest? Finally, in terms of the economic recovery, is the issue of work authorization generally. And this is something that Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli had made mention of. In the past, every immigration benefit program that was issued, Congress and the executive branch was very deliberate and considerate about whether to also issue work authorization for each of those programs. And now that doesn't seem to be the case. The default seems to be to grant work authorization. And it's done very inconsistently, different terms of years, extensions are permitted. So now would be the time to take an overall look at work authorization as a program and to make it more consistent and get back to the original intent. I will make one comment regarding DACA, and then I know Hans wants to will want to make some more DACA points. And that is, every few months or so, we get chatter that staff are working on a DACA deal. I would strongly recommend against that, as Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli talked about the programs that were put in place and how hard DHS and DOD and others worked to get control over the southwest border and control over the caravans and to get those historic numbers of illegal crossings down. Those hard-fought programs would be severely damaged, and the numbers would balloon again if DACA recipients were issued green cards. It basically tells future illegal aliens, all you need to do is cross the border, wait, and eventually you'll get a green card. So again, ill-advised, but I know Hans would like to talk a little bit more about that. So I'll turn it over to Hans.
Great. And just so folks know, DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival. It deals with children who came here illegally and their legal status in the United States. And Hans, I think the Supreme Court's also going to make a ruling on this. I'm sure you're going to address that as well. So over to you, Hans.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Laura. Look, immigration is really basically divided into two areas: legal immigration and illegal immigration, although there are a lot of people that want to extinguish the line between the two. I'm not going to talk a lot about legal immigration other than to say that, the president has proposed that we switch from the frankly archaic 19th, 20th century system we have now to a merit-based system for legal immigration. This is the kind of system that countries like Australia and Germany have, and we need to give serious consideration to that. But Congress is at loggerheads over that, so that's probably not going to happen anytime in the foreseeable future. The president has been trying to deal with illegal immigration. Ronald Reagan once said that a nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation, and that is more true today than it has ever been. Candidate Donald Trump, I think, was in part elected because one of the things he promised to do was enforce existing immigration laws and secure the border. And once he became president, he actually began to try to enforce federal immigration law as it's written, which is a radical departure from prior administrations, including the Obama administrations. Now, almost every single policy like that he has implemented has been challenged in the courts. And the administration has ultimately won most of those cases once they've gotten to the higher courts, particularly the Supreme Court, in large part because the president has been simply following the laws, the immigration statutes passed by Congress, and exercising his discretion according to those statutes. The administration has taken so many actions that we are, in fact, writing a paper, which I think right now is up to about 70 pages, summarizing all the different things that he has done. So there's no way to cover that in the amount of time we have. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of examples of how the president has actually exercised the authority that he does have under the law as given to him by Congress to show the effectiveness of the policies that he has tried to put in place. Probably the prime example that most folks know about is in 2017, he issued a series of executive orders and a proclamation to try to improve the vetting procedures needed to assess aliens who want to come into the country to see whether or not they represented a national security threat to the United States. After a very extensive review by the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department that involved them looking at the vetting procedures for every single country in the world, the president restricted entry from 8 countries that were state sponsors of terrorism, that provide safe haven for terrorism, or provide insufficient information for the U.S. to vet aliens who want to come in. Although even there were exemptions for permanent resident aliens and also for other aliens on a case-by-case basis. That, of course, was stopped in the courts. Several courts issued nationwide injunctions, but the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately dissolved those injunctions and upheld what the president was doing because there was a very specific federal statute that gives the president the ability to suspend the entry of aliens when he determines that it's in the best interests of the United States. What's so interesting about this is there was this huge outcry over this and all these lawsuits. Ultimately, the administration won, and yet just recently, when the president exercised the same authority to suspend the entry of aliens in the United States to stop the spread of COVID-19, there were no complaints that he was somehow acting beyond his authority. I think that's an example of the misplaced priorities of individuals trying to stop the president's actions. Another example of the president actually trying to enforce the law is the U.S. Justice Department last year, for the first time ever, started investigating and prosecuting agencies that engage in what's called birth tourism. They indicted the operators of 3 different tourist agencies in California who basically engage in immigration fraud by bringing women, in the case of these 3 agencies, mostly from China, to the United States on tourist visas, basically lying to immigration authorities. They bring them in on tourist visas with the intention of giving birth here so that they can then claim U.S. citizenship. And what was interesting about these cases was that many of the clients were actually Chinese government officials. And according to the indictments, they were directly involved, these Chinese government officials, in fraudulently procuring a birthright citizenship for their children in order to obtain, and this is a quote from the indictments, priority for jobs in the U.S. government, which obviously raises serious potential national security concerns. Now, the prosecutions are good. This is the first time it's happened in history, but in order to also deter this from happening in the future, the president this year changed policy, the State Department, so that it will no longer issue temporary visas to aliens who are traveling to the United States for the sole reason of wanting to give birth to a child here to be able to claim citizenship. But even there, they put in exemptions, for example, for individuals who need to come here for necessary medical treatment. All of these actions are common sense and is obviously long overdue to try to prevent illegal immigration in the United States. One action the administration has not taken is ending birthright citizenship. That is based on a misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment. It's a misinterpretation that has only existed and been applied by the U.S. State Department starting around the early 1960s. It is a misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment. We are one of the few countries in the world that recognizes birthright citizenship, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, one, given the language of the amendment, and second, the idea that if someone is simply a tourist in the United States, or they're simply here illegally, they obviously have no political allegiance to the United States, and their children should not be considered citizens of the United States. Another change that they have made in policy, but not in the law, is something that also was apparently opposed by many people, mostly people who believe in open borders, and that was a change in what's called the public charge rule. It has been part of American immigration law since the 1880s that aliens who are coming here should not be considered admissible if they are likely to become a public charge. A public charge means someone who's unable to support themselves and instead relies on public benefits such as welfare assistance. The Obama administration had a what I consider absurd rule in place, saying that the only way you'd be considered to be a public charge is if you receive cash benefits from the government, ignoring all other public assistance that individuals receive. Like I said, that made no sense whatsoever. So what this new rule does is simply a recognition of reality, and it's a smart choice in the best interest of the country to ensure that new immigrants, legal immigrants, are self-sufficient individuals who will be a net plus to our economy. It does not make any sense to ignore the very extensive welfare benefits we have these days that include everything from medical benefits to housing to other public assistance programs. The DACA case, which was mentioned before by Lora and I think by Ken Cuccinelli. Look, the only entity in the federal government that has the authority under the Constitution to determine who can be in the United States legally is Congress, not the President of the United States, unless that authority is granted to him. But one of the authorities that is not granted to the President is to determine that individuals who have come into the country illegally are suddenly made legal, are given an amnesty, and are provided with government benefits like work permits. Yet that is exactly what President Obama did when he started the DACA program. This was a program that provided what amounted to an administrative amnesty for minors up to the age of 16. And it also provided them not just with a promise that they would not be removed from the United States, but with government benefits such as a work permit. President Trump ended this program, giving a 6-month lead time in order to give Congress the ability to make a determination whether they wanted to pass legislation to put in place some kind of DACA program. Congress did not do that. Again, the president's actions were challenged, nationwide injunctions were issued, and we will hear from the Supreme Court on this. I have a serious problem thinking that they are not going to come to any conclusion other than that one president with an executive order can certainly end a program that was established by an executive order of a prior president. Executive orders are not federal law and can be withdrawn at any time by a president. Now, I think the nationwide injunctions that were issued had no basis in law by the judges who issued them. The president has gone through and put in all kinds of other changes to try to stop the problems that we have along the border. Everything from the migrant protection protocols that Ken Cuccinelli mentioned, to they have put in pilot programs along the border for DNA testing. Why? Well, because there are a lot of individuals who are coming in claiming to be families because of court rulings that then prevent families with young children from being removed from the country. They've put in pilot DNA testing programs, and as is probably no surprise to anyone, I have found many individuals who are claiming to be family members and aren't. They're just trying to take advantage of a loophole in the law. The migrant protection protocols, which require individuals to be returned to Mexico while their asylum claims are being reviewed, is also smart policy and common sense, because if you look at the data put out by DHS, you find that something like 90% of asylum claims turn out to be bogus. So the point of all of this is that the president has tried to actually enforce the law. He has been slowed down and stymied in many instances by lawsuits that have been filed against him and against the administration. When those cases get to Supreme Court, in most cases, he has won those cases. So he actually is trying to keep his promises to enforce federal immigration law. But when it comes to closing some of the loopholes that exist in the current law, that's not going to happen until Congress acts. And at the moment, it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Okay,
Thanks, Jim.
We're really looking forward to your research coming out. We'll share that to everybody when it is. Tons of questions. Please keep them coming in. We'll get to as many as possible. I understand the secretary is still on the line, so we might as well start with the ones that have been mentioned most frequently. Ms. Secretary, can you update us on where's the administration going in regards to the birthright citizenship issue and the DACA issue? We still have the secretary?
Yes, so DACA, obviously, we're on hold awaiting the Supreme Court decision. If I remember correctly, this is the longest that the Roberts Court has ever gone from oral argument to the issuance of an opinion. So they're obviously waiting to drop it with the controversial ones at the end of the term, not to suggest it isn't controversial, but I agree with Hans that it is unimaginable there could be any outcome other than upholding the president's authority to undo what his predecessor did here quite illegally. With respect to birthright citizenship, there really hasn't been any movement on that front. You know, given all the other balls we have in the air, that this periodically comes up in discussion, but there hasn't been any concentrated work on it that I have observed. And I was at USCIS before I was deputy secretary, so I've been right in the thick of it. And if that was moving forward, certainly I think you'd have seen more activity. More critically is that DACA decision coming up and preparing to implement it, the phase out of DACA, if that's our main focus right now on those two fronts.
Right. So you cut out for a second there. So I don't want anybody to miss the punchline on DACA. So right now the administration's plan is if they get a Supreme Court ruling that's favorable, is they're going to proceed with the phase out of DACA. Is that correct?
Yes, Jim, that's it.
And let me ask you another question from our good friend Gary Yarborough down there in Texas. Asks, are there other reforms in the pipeline for the asylum system to combat fraud and reduce the current workload?
Yes, there are. However, they're in the middle of a process. It's a little bit dicey for me to speak publicly about them, but news on this front in the coming weeks and month or two. So there'll be more to look forward to, and that's outside of the executive order arena with in response to COVID and so forth. That's on its own terms, on the merits, working to adjust the rules to make them much more consistent with the rule of law.
And I have a question here from Priscilla Alvarez at CNN. Her question is, when does the administration plan to roll out a regulation barring work authorization for migrants who cross the border illegally, and who would it apply to?
I lost you at
Oh, sure.
work authorization for migrants.
Right. So the question is when does the administration plan to roll out a regulation barring work authorizations for migrants who cross the border illegally?
Well, I'm not prepared to address it directly. Obviously, Priscilla's asking because nothing like that has been out yet. But it's certainly something that would have a tremendous effect. It would eliminate one of the biggest draws so certainly something I would be supportive of, and that is a subject to address other regulations that are long overdue for cleaning up and fixing, including dealing with what people can do for work permits and who qualifies for them. Those sorts of questions, like are part of the DACA question. You know, and there we were talking about 600,000 or 700,000 people all in a swipe with the former president's pen and a phone. Well, that isn't how we do things in the Trump administration. We do them by the book, and we do them within the boundaries of the law. And having said that, there is a lot of room for a lot of opportunity to advance the rule of law together, and that has been very well received. It survived the massive court onslaught, and you can fully expect under this administration, right to the end of President Trump's next 4.5 years, to keep seeing exactly this kind of aggressive application of the law to bring how we operate in our society with the laws on the books, which hasn't happened in the prior administrations, whether they were Democrat or Republican.
So let me throw two more questions at you, and I'd like to bring Hans and Lora in as well. So one question is, I'll combine them. There are a number of questions on, is there anything we can look forward to in terms of non-immigrant visa reform, H-1Bs, temporary workers, et cetera? And then I'd like your thoughts on sanctuary. Hans and Lora to chime in on that one as well.
So on non-immigrant visas, you saw in the president's April 22nd proclamation where he halted incoming green card recipients. These would be lawful permanent residents coming in at a time where in double-digit unemployment. The president believed that was an appropriate first step, and he directed the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Labor to on the entire waterfront, including non-immigrant visas that you asked about, James. We have a timeline active order, the proclamation technically, and so we are. You're going to see some more news on that probably sometime soon. But if you look at that proclamation, it had a 60-day life, and you can expect that the president will decide to either extend and apply whatever additional conditions he thinks are appropriate for the economic recovery, to Laura's point earlier, or that we're on a good enough path to do through an executive, an on problem. You know, the 10th Amendment gives states and localities a great deal of freedom, particularly the freedom to not do things, which sounds like a funny thing to say, but the federal government cannot compel states to act. The federal government can put conditions on the money it gives states. And you have seen some of that happening, though frankly, it would have been better if we started to steer more of the grant structures in that direction, I think, than happened. And this is the one area, the only area where the Trump administration didn't have virtually unilateral success in the courts, was with how grant monies targeting sanctuary cities and so forth played out. So at DHS, we're looking at other alternatives. We are the largest law enforcement entity in the country. There's more law enforcement officers in the Department of Homeland Security than in the Department of Justice or in any police department around the country. So this is of great interest to us. It is a direct attempt to impede our mission, and we will not be impeded, not under this. Like you'll recall seeing in the news, surging 100 CBP officers to help ICE with their release, so we could be sure we could repatriate them back to their home countries. That has been an important part of our strategy. And of course, we already talked about the Title 42, where we're turning them around literally so fast that they don't ever get into our country. I think we have probably reached a point in the last few months, though I haven't measured it yet. I will, where we're repatriating, meaning deporting more illegals than are coming into the country. And I don't know how far back you've got to go previous to 2020 to find that happen.
Thank you. Let me ask Lora, and we have a few minutes left. Lora and Hans, thoughts, sanctuary cities, other enforcement measures that you think are really critical, and then we'll just wrap up. So maybe brief thoughts from you guys.
So I'll mention
to achieve that I know of, and sanctuary cities are trying to get in the way of that effort, and we have to solve it.
Thanks. Laura?
I'll mention
That's all I got on that one.
I'll mention real quick the most recent and kind of most egregious sanctuary situation, and that's out of the state of New York. So the state legislature there passed what was called a green light law prohibiting New York DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, to share information with, in effect, Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. New York didn't foresee, however, running into a problem with trusted traveler programs where CBP needs DMV information to complete those trusted traveler applications, as well as some other transportation uses. So New York eventually amended its law, added language to say, if you're applying for trusted traveler program, okay, this information can be shared. But then went one step further and said, not only DMV should you not share information with these law enforcement agencies, it is a felony if you do so. That's just unheard of. It is dangerous. And several New York chiefs and law enforcement officers came out in opposition to the original version of the green light law. But now that it's a felony to share this information, it's even worse. And it returns New York to a pre-9/11 posture.
Hans, last thoughts? I think you're muted, Hans. Hans, I think you're still on mute. Still on mute.
There we go. Sorry, I had been muted.
Yeah,
Look,
last thoughts real quick.
Here's the bottom line on sanctuary policies. The mayors and city council members who put these policies in act as if they've done something noble. In fact, what they're doing is putting in reckless policies that endanger their residents. Why? Because what the sanctuary policies are doing is saying that when a criminal illegal alien is arrested for a local crime, rape, assault, robbery, burglary, they are not going to notify federal officials so that when that individual, that illegal alien, has served their local sentence, they're not going to call federal authorities so that person can be removed from the United States. Instead, they're going to release that criminal back into the local communities. And that means that they are endangering local residents by repeat criminals. And anyone who doubts that, look, DHS has been putting out some very shocking reports on the crimes committed by criminal aliens, particularly in places like Washington and Oregon, where the sanctuary policy is statewide. The crimes committed by those aliens who were released because of a sanctuary policy, despite the fact that DHS sent them a detainer warrant saying, please hold them until we can pick them up. And the crimes that these illegal aliens have then committed range from rape and assault to murder. And that is directly traceable to those sanctuary policies and those officials in those states who said, we'd rather release these criminals back into our local communities than have them removed from the country. That is a dangerous, reckless, and frankly, stupid policy.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us to the end. That's really impressive. I want to thank you for all your questions and all the research that we discussed today. We'll make sure that we get that out to you. I think the bottom line here is people need to process all that has been done and all that potentially can be done, and look at how the trend lines have really shifted in 3 years and reversed. And that's a result of actually having enforcement in immigration and border security policies. I think that's the big takeaway and lesson learned here. So let me ask Ries. Well, first of all, let me thank my panelists. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ask Ries to come back on and close us out. Thank you, guys.
Great, thank you, Jim. Thank you to our speakers for your comments today and the work you do every day helping lead the conversation for us at Heritage, as well as shaping this conversation nationally. Thank you to the audience for joining us and for all of your questions. Please feel free to email me at cherise.trump, cherise.trump@heritage.org with any additional questions you may have for the experts. As I mentioned earlier, please complete the brief survey that's going to appear on your screen once we turn this off. And you can also visit resourcebank.org for the recording of this, this panel and upcoming programs. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.